what I'm trying to help everybody to understand here is this is not just a one-sided thing. This is not just government beating down farmers. Now farmers they're trying to get us all to believe that. But you know, I'm not a friend of manure in the canals. I'm not a friend of, manure pollution and housing animals all the time. I'm not a friend of that. And so I get some of this. Now, as with all backlashes, though, the pendulum never swings and stops in the middle. It always overcorrects. And that's exactly what's happening in the EU. The EU has overcorrected. It's hard for us in the US, I rail against our regulatory climate, but it's important to realize that we have way fewer regulations than a lot of other places in the world. For example, in Spain, you cannot allow a chicken to touch wood. So everything involved with chickens has to be steel, has to be metal. Well, that means, if you want to build an egg mobile or you want to build a portable chicken shelter or whatever, it all has to be metal, even though wood is way easier and cheaper and actually, more ecologically friendly, has a smaller ecological footprint. They do that because they say that metal doesn't provide a house for mites. In New Zealand. Now, I know New Zealand is not EU, but I'm just giving you another example. So in New Zealand, I've been there numerous times. In New Zealand, you cannot house a chicken in a structure that is not mouse proof. So how do you have an egg mobile with chickens? It's not mouse proof. How do you have chickens on pasture? You can't. It's not mouse proof. And so New Zealand deals with this issue. These are the kinds of things that other countries deal with, and why things are developing in these other countries, like they are. And so I'll just kind of wrap it up here. The regulatory climate, for example, in I think it's in Austria. I was there in Austria. The EU requires every single egg to be candled and stamped with a little ink stamp. That sounds, it's not too bad, but a small farmer, that's a lot of handwork to actually put an ink stamp on every single egg. Okay. And so what does that do? That makes it more and more difficult for small farmers to compete in the marketplace. And in fact, in Austria, a farm less than, I think it's about 2.5 acres, doesn't get any of these subsidies from the EU. So a 2.5 acre farm, if you're in produce or something really intensive, like intensive blackberries or strawberries or things like that, a 2.5 acre farm can be a very viable operation. But they've deemed that a farm at 2.5 acres doesn't even qualify as a farm. And so it doesn't get in any of this stuff. So these are the kinds of things that have made in the last, since 2005, so that's what, 19 years, 18, 19 years now, the EU has lost 1/3 of its farms since 2005. Think about that. Since 2005, the EU has lost 1/3 of its farms, and realize that they're under the same problem we have in the US, that the farmer is getting old, and old farmers don't like change. I mean, the older you get, the less you like change, right? And so you've got all these old codgers that have now grown up, some of them second generation, in this highly, highly subsidized, preferential thing. And suddenly between the green, the green agenda, the rising, the EU is trying to funnel money to Ukraine to fight Russia. And you've got, Germany spending 3 times as much as they used to spend for Russian natural gas. They're spending way more. Listen, in the Netherlands, hey, I went to this just occurred to me, Sina. In another one of the things I went to, one of the times I was in the Netherlands, they took me to one of these 25 acre greenhouses. This is a 25-acre farm. The whole thing is a greenhouse, and you basically you shower in, you shower out. It's a complete sterile environment, and these big greenhouses, you can actually see them from space. You can see them from the moon. These great big 25-acre lit up greenhouses, and they do hydroponic tomatoes in these things, and primarily sell them to China. Okay, but it's a way for the Netherlands to export water, because hydroponic tomatoes have 30% more water than soil-grown tomatoes. So they've got way too much water, and so they can send their water to the Chinese, and it's a way for the Netherlands to to get rid of some of their water. Well, to make the tomato plants grow better, they want more carbon dioxide. This is funny, carbon dioxide. So what do? So they've got cogeneration plants. These are electrical cogeneration plants, massive. When I went into the engine room, I mean, they had three massive, 500 horsepower diesel engines running on natural gas, not diesel, natural gas. And the exhaust, and was it to generate electricity in order to make? No, the electricity was just a byproduct. I mean, yeah, they used it, but the reason that the farms have these massive cogeneration plants is to take the exhaust and send it in tubes that come up at the tomato plants. So the tomato plants will get this. It's like a human. We put little oxygen things under our noses. If you have a problem. Okay. Well, it's like a little CO2 thing under the nose of a tomato plant. So the tomato plant grows way faster. But the problem is now in the Netherlands, they've pumped so much of this natural gas out of their natural cavities in the earth that they're having little earthquakes because houses are crumbling and collapsing because they've taken all the natural gas out. And so here's this entire system built on a resource at a point in time. Now suddenly there's no natural gas. They were getting it from Russia. Now they can't get it from Russia. So the whole thing starts to break down and collapse. And so these farmers are pressured. They're stressed, and the EU is trying to fund, ammunition to the Ukraine. So, well, where can we cut? If you were an EU parliamentary minister and you're saying, where can we cut some costs? Where can we cut some costs? Farmers are the smallest voting bloc. They're only 1.6% of the entire EU, gross domestic product, but they account for almost 50% of the EU budget. What would you cut? And so here we are. And so the tragedy, I'll finish this up. The tragedy of the whole thing for me is all these wonderful, big-hearted, I mean, my heart just, I get into tears. I understand the heartbreak of these farmers, but the biggest heartbreak is they refused to think about pasturing animals instead of putting in buildings. They refused to think about composting instead of Putin's chemical fertilizer. They refused to think about multi-speciation rather than monospeciation with monocultures with their crops. They refuse all of this ecological information that we have, and instead they take dump truck loads of tires and they're burning them in the streets of Paris, and they're carting their manure into the parliament and dropping the manure on the parking lot, and I won't even let somebody buy any of my manure. That's how precious it is. I'm talking about my cow manure, not but I won't even let somebody buy this stuff. That's how precious it is. And these farmers are just dumping it on Parliament steps to express their outrage of what's going on. And so my heart, for me, the emotional part is I feel sorry for these older farmers that have devoted their life to doing what they were told. And now the people who have been telling them, who they've been following all their lives, are starting to pull the plug on them. And these guys don't have the life force left in them to say, yeah, we can do better. We don't need these guys at Brussels. We don't need these subsidies. We can do better, and we can make it work. And that, for me, that's it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy of innovation. It's a tragedy of accepting a better way. And I'm looking forward to. I'll be in Vienna in May. I'll be in Hungary in May, and I'm looking forward to interacting, learning from them, and explaining to them that that I think that there's a way out. There's a better way, and they can tell Brussels to go take a hike if they want to really be an innovative. They can actually do that. But I can tell you, the EU regulations and requirements, as much as we, Sina, you and I, as much as we rail on U.S. food police, the EU is twice as bad as it is here in the States. And so I will be telling them and examining with them some avenues of circumventing some of these regulations. I remember very well, I think it was in Spain. It was in Spain. It was either there or Germany. And this farmer was talking about they had to wash the eggs. And I'm trying to remember now all the particulars of this, but it was something about they couldn't let the eggs get wet. And yet they had to wash them all. But there was some little technicality, and I was able to help him see a loophole. He said, "Wow, I never thought of that." But the fact is, these farmers aren't thinking. They're not thinking libertarian like we do. Americans, Sina, you can say what you want about this country, but we have individualistic liberty in our DNA. We do. And when the government starts to push hard, man, we just push right back. But in the EU, they're way more docile. They're way more compliant than we are here. And so I'll be trying to generate some rebels when I go over, but they won't be rebels that take manure to Parliament. They'll be rebels who get good food to their neighbors and circumvent the system. So I'm looking forward to it, and that's kind of my take on. I'm sorry I've gone on so long without a break here, but that's kind of my take on it, and I'm looking forward to being there.
Thank you for joining us on Beyond Labels. Our mission with this podcast is to make it accessible to everyone.
But we are behind a paywall because the issues we discuss are often subject to censorship. We've run into that, and so we have an extremely modest paywall to let us have the freedom to discuss the kind of issues we want to discuss in the way we want to discuss them. And you can become a member and enjoy all this content by clicking on the description box below. We look forward to having you join our family.